The North American Society for the Psychology of Sport and Physical Activity, NASPSPA, will celebrate its 50th anniversary in June of 2017. As part of the celebrations, it was decided that we would interview the previous distinguished scholars. My name is Penny McCullough, and today I will be chatting with Dr. Maureen Weiss. Through 2016, NASPSPA has named 24 distinguished scholars. Dr. Weiss was named a distinguished scholar in 2016. This interview is being conducted in February of 2017. Good afternoon, Dr. Weiss. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So let's get started here. So Dr. Weiss, please tell us a little bit about your academic background.
Okay. Well, I started my undergraduate program in math and psychology at the University of California at Irvine. And in pursuing a job to pay for tuition and expenses, I applied for and was selected to be a youth sport coach for the City of Newport Beach Parks and Recreation Department. That job, and more importantly my experiences coaching children and youth, literally changed my life. As I observed daily how children grew and developed through sport, my academic life course took a 180. I transferred to the University of California at Santa Barbara and embraced a major in kinesiology, then called physical education, while holding a double major in psychology with an emphasis in child psychology. At UCSB, I was exposed to established scholars in kinesiology and took my first sports psychology course with Vera Skubik, who I later learned was a pioneer in youth sports psychology. I completed my undergraduate and master's degrees at UCSB, served a short stint as a college basketball coach, and then pursued my doctoral degree in kinesiology with a focus in youth sports psychology at Michigan State University. My academic experiences, coupled with my years of coaching children and adolescents, were key to projecting my life's work in studying sport as a context for developing youth socially, psychologically, and physically.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit how you decided to pursue a doctoral degree in kinesiology. How did you decide what university you would go to? And then who was your mentor? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. So after receiving my master's degree at UCSB, I thought the next natural course of action was to move from coaching youth to coaching at the college level. This was right after Title IX was passed and was in the process of being implemented. So there were coaching jobs for women at the collegiate level, and women were being recruited for such slots. So I packed my bags and left sunny California to coach at a D1 university in Illinois at the age of 23. It was an exciting opportunity and offered unique challenges given the rise of competitiveness in women's sports. Although my experiences were mostly positive, I soon learned that my heart was not in the college-level win-at-all-costs philosophy of intercollegiate sport, but rather I was curious about understanding and contributing to the world of youth sports. So after 2 years, I hung up my coach's cap as I came to the realization that my passion for academic learning and scholarly endeavors far outweighed an initial entree into coaching. When I came to that realization, it hit me like a ton of bricks that I needed and wanted to pursue a doctoral degree in sports psychology. My master's advisors had predicted that I would go on one day to get a PhD, and now the light bulb came on. Having been mentored by Vera Skubik at UCSB, I naturally thought that such a degree program in sports psychology was widely available. Not so. And what made matters worse than just a few programs having an emphasis in sports psychology was that I came to my epiphany late in the application process for doctoral programs. From my research of what programs were out there, two main universities caught my interest, the University of Illinois and the University of Wisconsin. However, I was too late with my application materials. The decision to apply to and eventually attend Michigan State University was serendipitous rather than a pure informed choice. Let me explain. My brother was a physician in East Lansing and an adjunct professor at MSU. He was always a model of excellence for me, and I told him about my interest in pursuing a doctoral degree. He said that he would walk over to the physical education department and talk to the department chair about whether they have a program in sports psychology. He did so, and what he found out was that MSU had just hired an up-and-coming, fresh out of a doctoral program, assistant professor to start the program in sports psychology. That person was Dan Gould. Talk about timing and being in the right place at the right time. Because MSU was on the quarter system and started at the end of September, I was still on time with my application and was accepted into the program. Therein explains a roundabout and fortuitous process for how I chose my university and mentor. It was the perfect fit. Dan and I worked famously together and remain close friends to this day. And a year later, after I was accepted, the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports was born, and my dream of doing work in youth development through sport was realized.
Oh, that's absolutely fabulous story. I don't think I've ever heard that whole story before. And of course, I was an undergraduate student with Dan Gould, so yes, it just worked out great for you. That's absolutely excellent. So you were working with Dr. Dan Gould, who was a very young assistant professor who just finished school himself. Tell us a little bit about your doctoral dissertation under his guidance.
Okay, let's see. Did you want to do number 3, though, or do you recall?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Sorry.
What do you recall about your first, I'm sorry, this one. What do you recall about your first exposure, interest, or involvement in research? How did you get involved or interested?
Okay, great. So my first exposure to and involvement in research was my master's thesis at UCSB, which was a test of the held effect on human movement under variable conditions, a motor control study. My main advisor was Dr. Robert Parrish, who was a human factors researcher and conducted classic experimental studies. He was an outstanding model for me, very meticulous and careful with his work, and highly ethical in his approach to science. As a master's student, I was his TA in statistics, and I relished in emulating his careful and committed approach to working with students. He suggested the master's study idea and pinpointed the research question, and he even built the apparatus that I used in my study. I learned traditional research methods from him: design, methods, analyses, and interpretation, and this experience made an indelible impression on me. A few months after I completed my master's thesis, a study testing the same hypothesis was published, so I was unable to publish mine. But nevertheless, I found myself fascinated with and excited about the research process that would endure over 40 years later until now. I regret that I lost touch with Dr. Parrish, and I have tried to find him to thank him for his impact on me, but unfortunately Google has not been able to find him.
Oh, that's too bad. But your interest certainly in statistics started early and has continued throughout your career. So that's great.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your doctoral. Tell us a little bit about your doctoral dissertation, how you got into it, and
okay.
Yeah,
no, it was fun to reflect on this, to be honest. In hindsight, I love my doctoral dissertation study even more now than when I was doing it. The idea was conceived based on my coursework in sports psychology and developmental psychology, as well as my longtime experiences in coaching children and youth. In the late 1970s, observational learning was a mainstay topic in the social psychology of sport and physical activity, yet research on the effects of modeling on motor skill development had not considered developmental factors in the process. Having coached children in various sports and taken numerous developmental psychology courses, I knew that youth of different ages possess variations in attention and memory abilities, which naturally had an impact on their motor skill performance. Bandura's social learning theory was not developmental, but included attention, retention, production, and motivation as essential processes for successful modeling to occur. By pairing social learning theory with other appropriate developmental theories, I tested the hypothesis that younger and older children would differ in their ability to learn from watching a model. Indeed, show and tell models were superior for younger children whose attention, encoding, and rehearsal capabilities were not fully mature as those of older children who benefited from all model types. This study contributed to theory, the developmental modeling literature, and to practical implications for teaching and coaching youth. I went on to conduct many more developmental modeling studies, which was also a foreshadowing to the developmental theoretical philosophy I would adopt for my research in other social psychological areas of study.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, I'm very glad that I was able to work with you on some of that research. And I'd be remiss not to say that you always come up with wonderful titles for your research, show and tell, this and that. I mean, they're always great. So we need to let folks take a look at those titles because you come up with some good ones. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Dr. Weiss, your distinction of becoming a Distinguished Scholar of NASPA recognizes your long-standing contributions in the areas represented by your research. We'd now like you to share some thoughts on your scholarly endeavors. For example, maybe some of the things that you had as interests early on in your career, some basic underlying issues or questions that you've tried to answer. Tell us maybe about a research project that you're particularly proud of, or ideas about folks in the field that may have had an impact on some of your thinking. So tell us a little bit about your research.
Okay, I'll talk about kind of early and kind of go throughout the life course a little bit.
Okay, great.
So as just mentioned, one of my main areas of research was observational learning in children and youth. However, as a research assistant with the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports at Michigan State, I was involved in and developed a passion for other research topics relevant to children and adolescents in sport. These topics included motivation, self-perceptions, social relationships such as with parents, peers, and coaches, and moral development. Unsurprisingly, these topics can be approached from a developmental perspective, and that was the tack I took and continue to take over my career. A turning point in my research interests occurred when I attended my first NASPA conference as a doctoral student in 1980 in Boulder, Colorado. That was when I also met you, Penny. You introduced yourself as Podium with a Crew Cut, I think, something like that. Susan Harder was one of the keynote speakers.
Yeah.
She spoke on her then newly developed competence motivation theory. Her ideas were fairly radical for the time in that she insisted that joy is at the center of motivational processes. She talked about significant others' influence on perceived competence and control, and how these factors could influence the joy and intrinsic motivation to develop and demonstrate competence among youth. Because her theory was developmental, it jived with my own fairly undeveloped ideas at the time and provided a foundation and guide for asking questions and designing studies to test theory. I went on to conduct studies that tested various facets of competence motivation theory and other developmental theories highlighting social relationships, self-perceptions, and motivation in the sport context, and continue to do so now, 37 years later. My work has always been guided by theory, and based on my early experiences at UCSB and MSU, I have tried to ask good questions that push the knowledge base forward and use appropriate and meticulous methods in my research. One aspect that tugged at me after many years of research is my worry that theory-driven research was not being applied to grassroots organizations serving children and youth in sport and physical activity. Thus, since about 12 years ago, I shifted to working very closely with after-school organizations that deliver sport and physical activity to children and youth, drawing me back to the same type of program that as a young college student I cut my teeth on. I was especially drawn to working with organizations that deliberately see physical activity as a vehicle for teaching life skills to youth. And in the last 12 years, I have worked closely with Girls on the Run and the First Tee on curricular development, coach training, and evidence-based research of program effectiveness. This work has been some of the most fulfilling, albeit challenging efforts on the part of my students and me. But I feel that the collaboration of academic researchers, community organizations, and stakeholders such as coaches, parents, and school personnel has made a big difference in translating theory and research to evidence-based best practices for benefiting youth through their participation in physical activity. Over the course of my work, the past 37 years, I have published several book chapters, critical review articles, and empirical studies on positive youth development through sport and physical activity. I hope that in time these ideas will make an impact on young researchers in our field, as well as those who deliver programs in the trenches to youth in sport and physical activity contexts.
Oh, thank you. That was great summary of your work, and you've certainly done so much. And it really is nice that you're finding such gratitude and giving it back to the community and places that can use the information. So that's really nice. Dr. Weiss, tell us a little bit about your involvement with NASPA, and then also what does it mean to you to be named a Distinguished Scholar of NASPA?
Great. This is great. NASPA is near and dear to my heart. I attended and presented at my first NASPA conference as a doctoral student at that 1980 Boulder, Colorado conference, and have presented along with my students at every conference since then, although I did miss attending 2 out of the past 38 conferences. I feel that I grew up as a professional in this organization, and from the get-go, senior members were kind to me, took me under their wing, and encouraged me. I have tried to do the same, pay it forward, if you will, as a senior member of the Society now. In 1986 to 1988, I served as Secretary-Treasurer of the organization and worked on the Executive Committee with Mary Ann Roberton, Dan Landers, Mike Wade, Gil Reeve, and Thelma Horn. In this role, I got to know and appreciate the organization and all it did to assist members, especially students. Before, during, and after that, I presented symposia, verbal papers, and posters, and always included my students who I encouraged to become contributing members of the Society. I served as a member and chair of several sport and exercise psychology conference committees, as well as an editorial board member and associate editor for the Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology, one of the official publications of NASPA. I was elected president-elect of NASPA at the 2004 meeting in Vancouver, BC, and I remember feeling so proud and honored on the bus ride to the aquarium for the banquet that evening. One that you organized. That was a great, great banquet. I was especially pleased because Al Smith, my doctoral student at Oregon, was elected as Secretary-Treasurer at the same conference, thus allowing us to work alongside each other again. Years later, he would be elected president of the Society, and I would be selected as past president's liaison, again pairing us in organizational service. In 2009, I was fortunate to be the senior lecturer for sport and exercise psychology at the Austin Conference. By that time, numerous of my former and current academic kids were attending, presenting at, and serving NASPA. I am proudest of my students for their passion and participation in the field and their participation in professional service. 3 years later, in 2012, I was selected to serve as past president's liaison in the executive board, which represented the 3rd time I was privileged to serve the Society in a leadership role. Now, 5 years later, I'm getting ready to step down as past president's liaison and pass the baton, but I am very proud of the institutional memory I provided executive members and establishing a memorials process and an annual past president's luncheon. In 2016, I was recognized with NASPA's Lifetime Achievement Award, the Distinguished Scholar Award, for which I am very humbled and honored to be among a group of individuals who have pioneered the areas of sport and exercise psychology and motor behavior. To be recognized by my peers and my people is a highlight of my career and a reminder that the people who matter the most in my life are truly my colleagues and peers in this preeminent organization.
Wow, thank you. I have tears in my eyes after that. Well, NASPA would certainly like to thank you for sharing your thoughts. And of course, you told us about your leadership roles that are well appreciated. You've had so many students, and they come back to NASPA and they contribute So you certainly made your mark just beyond your scholarship alone, which is fabulous, but you've also made major contributions to the society. So we thank you for that. And we'll look forward to also, we're constructing some family trees, so hopefully those will carry on too, so people can see who you have mentored into upcoming leadership roles. So we thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the 50th anniversary conference.
Thank you, Penny. This was great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, and thank you for your time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.